Greetings, family. Welcome back to the Learning Channel. We have some science to discuss today. Black History Month. I'm going to try to walk through this slowly so that I don't lose you because we have some deep science to delve into. We're going to talk about pineal gland, power, neuromelanin, and ancient wisdom. So I dedicate this lecture, this presentation, to Dr. Richard D. King, the master scientist, brought this line of attention to me. He passed away in 2013. May his soul rest in peace. But if it wasn't for Dr. Richard King and his work, Melanin, A Key to Freedom, his articles in Uraeus, the Journal of Unconscious Life. He's written several articles. One of them is The Eye of Heru, The Eye of the Soul, African Spirituality, The Eye of Inner Vision. So what I'm presenting today is really an extension of his magnificent work and his classic book called African Origin of Biological Psychiatry. So I dedicate this presentation to Brother Dr. Richard King. We're also colleagues and co-authors on a book called Why Darkness Matters, Power of Melanin in the Brain. So I am proceeding with this topic because I gave a presentation in 1994, decades ago, on pineal gland, neuromelanin, and consciousness. There were like over 7,000 views on this since that time period. And let me see if there's a part 1 and part 2 that's out there. But let's see. This is what I was talking about, if you see that and hear that.
In this first slide, we have the morphogenesis of the central nervous system. The point I want to make about this particular slide is to make emphasis on where it is that we find melanin at the very beginnings of human origin.
So I'm not sure if you were able to see and hear that, but I had presented that back in 1994. So I want to go deep, diving into this topic and research that has been conducted since then and thought processes about what this really means, about talking about the pineal gland power. Now look, Western science, Eurocentric researchers, the way they perceive things, Black people never done anything. Never contributed to science, civilization, and society. Well, I got the documentation to show we've done. I got information to show you that we've contributed. But when people start talking about the pineal gland from a Western Eurocentric perspective, they think of Galen of Pergamon, 130 to 200 BC. That's fairly early. That's also after the Greek era. But they think about him, or that person being the one talking about pineal gland. Then you have Herophilus. Even Dr. Richard King talks about him, or this person, 325 to 80 BC may have been a time frame that there was a discussion about the anatomy of the place in the brain where the pineal gland is located. And this is kind of interesting because the Greeks and those people during that time period, they weren't dissecting. They considered it a demonic process. They weren't into cutting the body up like that. So couldn't have been them that found this out. We fast forward to the AD time. You may have heard of René Descartes. René Descartes pushed the seat of the soul, and the seat of the soul was supposed to be that pineal gland. Now, all these conceptualizations could not have started with European white individual scientists thinking about this. This had to have been discussed for centuries prior to. Now, how do we look at this thing called the pine cone and relate this to our discussion? Look, pine cones are geometrically arranged in interlocking spirals that correspond to Fibonacci numbers 8 and 13. The structure provides maximum gap-free packing efficiency for seeds and optimal sunlight exposure. This natural spiraling growth pattern develops as new scales form at the golden angle of approximately 137.5 degrees from the previous one. allowing for efficient, non-wasteful growth. This allows for the maximum number of seeds to be packed into the smallest space without leaving gaps. Now, what do pine cones have to do with the pineal gland? So when we say this kind of geometric pattern that's in the pine cone, here you see the spiral nature, and you see the divisions that are discussed about the spirals and the scales. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That magic 13 is always important for me. Talking about, again, renewal. So here's another pine cone showing the exact same thing. The science of the pine cone. As the pine cone grows, each new scale is positioned at the golden angle relative to the last to ensure no overlap and to prevent overcrowding and to allow each scale to receive maximum exposure to sunlight and resources. This is maximum science going on without you even thinking about it. The Creator put this on the planet and showed by example how geometry and sacred science can be put into elements of life right in front of you. This arrangement creates a tight, interlocking structure that protects the developing seeds, and the pattern itself is a result of the most efficient way to organize growth in a circular space. In my yard, cleaning up this fall, getting ready for the spring, I had all these pine cones, and that gave me this desire to go deeper now into the pineal gland to discuss it for the people. So these pine cones are representing renewal and life, regenerating, eternal existence, and the pineal gland is a part of that process. Now, let me come back to this, the Anunnaki. Let me come back to this. So in my yard, as I'm picking up these pine cones, I collected a few, and the like opens up. But the design, as you said, about the spirals, some science to that. Some of them look really nice and concentric. You can see them. The spiral. Fibonacci pattern. So thinking about this acorn and how people are holding it and representing it way in the past. Pine cones, pine trees are everywhere. The seeds are able to be kind of blown, and you see little pine, earthlings or pines coming up in your yard, and you think about how seeds do that. Well, see this bag? It's a bag that you're going to see in the next slide. Just like you're also going to see pine cone in the next slide. So I'm just showing this bag because I can create any kind of bag. In the past, they could create any kind of bag, but this is the kind of bag that they were carrying. I think they were carrying seeds. I use that example because I have some seeds in here. What are these seeds? From a whole another year ago. These are actually okra seeds. I can take these anywhere, plant them, and grow. Okra anywhere. So I believe they were carrying this bag as seeds for life, for regeneration, for feeding, for eating, as people were traveling throughout the world. There were no Kroger's, Piggly Wiggly's, Walgreens, dollar stores. People had to create their own food and develop their own way of feeding themselves. So I believe that bag contained the seeds of life. So this is an ancient image of a figure called an Anunnaki. That's the name of the person in the time frame. This is like maybe could be 8,000 BC. But they have this bag, same bag I just showed you. They have the acorn I just showed you. What does that have relevance to today? It just shows you that in ancient times, they understood principles better than we understood them today. So there was something too about creation and renewal, and the fact that they used the same acorn in that image. I'm showing the acorn. They got that bag. It could be any kind of bag, but they had a bag that were carrying, I say seeds to be able to plant elsewhere. There must have been some importance to this acorn, this pine cone. I'm saying this pine cone because even in the Vatican, in the courtyard there, is a gigantic pine cone, 13 feet tall. Is that 13 again? It's always symbolism everywhere around us, geometry. Even Swallow de Lubeck talks about that in The Temple in Man. The Temple in Man by Swallow de Lubeck. Also, he wrote Symbol and Symbolic. I'll bring back some books later on. As you know, we wrap up this usually with a discussion of some books. But the Vatican at the courtyard has this eternal life and renewal representation, and using the pine cone to represent that. Again, back to the Pineal Gland. Now, ancient African people were the ones that were dissecting and using the body for things like mummification. They had to take the body parts out, put them in canopic jars. Canopic jars to put body parts in. So they knew about the body. When you read the literature, it sounds like they just extracted the brain out for the nose and pulled it out. But I've done brain surgery on animals. You crack the back of the bone. You expose that with some bone cutters. You cut the top of the head so you spread the cranium and you can peel the brain out. I'm sure that's what they were able to do in the past to study the brain. But listen to the scientific colonialism about describing some things that pertain to ancient history, but how it kind of weeds out and takes away a black connection. So Anubis was the particular godlike figure that was helping out when people crossed over in the afterlife. So it says, in ancient Egypt, the activities of embalmers were sanctioned by law. The god INPW, I would pronounce it Itmu, from the Greek Anubis, meaning he who is in the place of embalming, was identified with the process of mummification and the afterlife, especially during the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom was definitely black people. You get the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom. Old Kingdom was unquestionably black. Anubis was depicted as a figure with the head of a jackal, you see right here, while the black color, you could leave it right there and stop, but they say, this is a European description, used in painting the images of this deity, expressed both the post-mortem composition of the body, like something negative and bad with the body turning black, and the fertile soil of the Nile Valley, a symbol of rebirth. Soil. The people in Kemet called it the land of the blacks. When European, Western scientists, Eurocentric people look at that, oh no, the land was black, not the people were black. They do whatever they can to exclude the African black connection to this part of the world that dealt with the creation of many of these ideas. So, what we're saying here is this is scientific colonialism to make you not see and understand the presence of black people in these places. Now, it can be really confusing when you look at some books. I have this large book on King Tut Ankhemen. It says Tutankhamun. I mean, big, thick books, beautiful pictures. Look at these pictures. This is one of the headdresses. So in the headdress, this is a Uraeus. Uraeus is the term for what's going on in the headdress, but there's two images. One a vulture, one a cobra. Vulture and a cobra. From my understanding with this Uraeus, if you read what Uraeus means, U-R-A-E-U-S, Uraeus. The insignia of the rulers of ancient Egypt worn on crowns and headdresses to denote rank. The Uraeus was composed of symbols of the cobra, I just showed you, and the vulture, just showed you. Sometimes the cobra alone. The reptile represented Wajet, the protectoress of Lower Egypt. Now look, the Nile River flows up. So basically it's up in Middle Africa. As it goes toward the north, it's flowing down. So Upper Egypt is actually internal Africa. Lower Egypt is now further away, leaving, going up towards the Mediterranean. So it says, the reptile represented Wadjet, the protectress of Lower Egypt, and the vulture was Nekhebet, the vulture goddess who served Upper Egypt. Wadjet was always shown with his hood extended. That is the, a cobra, and how it opens up the hood. It says, Wadjet was always shown with its hood extended, threatening the enemies of Egypt as the serpent threatened the foes of the god Ra. The cobra was sometimes depicted in the cults of the deities Horus and Osiris. So again, Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper was deep in, lower is, again, up towards the Mediterranean. So that Uraeus became important to describe how they looked at, you look at that snake and that head of the snake. It's like that pineal gland. Look at that head of that vulture, the pineal gland. And again, they had it represented around where the head was. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So as they were dissecting the brain, I'm pretty sure they were able to see some things in there. This is the sagittal section of the brain. When you cut it from the eyeball to the back of the head, and you look at everything from the side, it's called a sagittal section. See the eyeballs right there. Look at this one side of the brain, this one that's lying down flat. There's the pons, cerebellum. There's the brain stem. That little canal there is the ventricular system. There's the third ventricle. So what you have here, third ventricle right here, that's the fourth ventricle. So fourth, 3. You have this corpus callosum. You have the middle part of the hair is called the thalamus. And right there is the pineal gland. Dead center. 2 little bumps behind it. I'll show you another image that has this also. But as you're seeing the brain, you're seeing things. So the way they came up with the third eye is looking at what's going on in the brain. So there's the image of the third eye right here. If you overlay this onto the brain, there's the thalamus right there. The corpus callosum is this little or large structure right here of white matter. That's the corpus callosum. I believe as this extension comes down here, there's the pons, little bump, there's the pons. There's the brain stem going down here. And so this little curl, that might be that cerebellum. So they're using this to represent, again, the eye of Heru. And deep in the brain, right there, the pineal gland exists, sitting in fluid. That looks like a little cavity there, but that's just an opening in the brain. Fluid flows around the brain. So there's the pineal gland again. Fluid is flowing around the brain. It's flowing right here. And the place that makes the fluid, or the items that make the fluid, are called the choroid plexus. These areas right here are making that cerebrospinal fluid that allow the fluid to flow inside the brain along these pathways, the aqueducts, and it goes around the brain and comes back into the brain, around the brain, back into the brain. So the choroid plexus, this is what produces that. Again, thalamus, the eye. Corpus callosum, that's the top part of that third eye. And then you got the cerebellum, that little loop right there. So that third eye is what they were seeing when they were talking about the brain. CSF means cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebrospinal fluid flows all around, see those arrows are, all around the brain. It's like a cushion. Transport waste material. It transports neurotransmitters. It's in communication with the other parts of the body by allowing the chemicals to flow. So where you see the arrows are where the chemicals are flowing. So deep in the brain, you see it's also flowing. The choroid plexus produces that cerebrospinal fluid, and it flows right down there. So there's the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, goes down to the spinal column. But look at that. That's where the pineal gland is sitting right there, dead center. The eyeballs over here, the pineal gland is dead center, like a third eye. Some people call it first eye. But that's where it's located, dead center. So when people are meditating, they're trying to elevate the chemicals, the physical attributes of this organ to make it stimulated to make chemicals flow in your body, give you a different sense of how you're perceiving the world. That's why Descartes called it the seat of the soul, but he got that from African people talking about the Ivory and talking about the spiritual nature of where we exist, how it exists in the brain. Neuromelanin becomes some dark splotches that are deep in the brainstem. It's a spinal cord, but this is all leading up to the brainstem. So you see a brain over here. This cross section is the top part of the brain here. This cross section right here is in the middle part of the brain. This cross section right here is down here lower. So deep in the middle of the brain, so right here, are these melanated structures like the substantia nigra. No darkness in that brain, you have some problems. The red nucleus. Red, as you stain it, it comes out red. Two little splotches on both sides of the brain, left and right side of the brain. If they're not there, you have some issues with observing things and visualizing them. Another name for the red nucleus are mirror neurons. And there are ways that you can see, like if you have a baby, maybe a month old, you laugh, the baby laughs. You cry, baby cries. Mirror neurons is reflecting in that brain things that you're thinking about. Think about moonwalking. Guess what? Michael Jackson could moonwalk. That's the first thing that may come to your mind. You're not doing it, but it's in your mind. Moonwalking. Those mirror neurons do that. So they capture activity, capture it, and use it for later use. So the pineal gland is deep up in the brain, up in the top of the brain, but below are these other organs or subcortical structures that are serving a purpose to keep the brain connected on a higher level of consciousness. You must learn to activate it. So, how do you activate it? Well, I wrote a book called Dark Matters, Dark Secrets, and there I have chapters on the psycho-neuroendocrinology of sunlight and darkness. In sunlight, as the sun shines, it certainly goes through your eyes. The eyes then go to the pineal gland, but there's a whole level of connection from the eye to the retina to the suprachiasmatic nucleus to the superior cervical ganglion, then to the pineal gland. It's like a whole circuitry that happens to get it from the eyeball to the pineal gland. So in those connections, what you have the sun producing that, but hey, can it also go on the top of the skull? That's why that question mark is there. If you know the pineal gland is right there, is it possible that it's coming over and coming in up the top? So when people have that halo around their head, and you see the pictures of Christ, the halo represents the awakening of these inner centers like the pineal gland. Pineal gland releases something called melatonin at nighttime. It releases serotonin during the daytime. So it's the sunlight and darkness that is controlling our internal mechanisms. So the melatonin can be released going to the bloodstream and then go impact certain parts of the body, dealing with reproductive system, your immune system, anti-inflammatory issues. It can have a whole host of positive aspects on your life. It can also retract the granules in your skin, retract the melanin granules so sunlight gets in at nighttime so you can stay healthy. You need sun. Without the sun, you don't get your vitamin D. It's not even a vitamin, you don't get your sotriol. It's a steroid hormone. It's a whole lot of science in this. So I'm trying to talk slow so you can either go back, look at it, but hear what I'm saying about the intensity of these chemicals in our body that are the result of the environment impacting how we operate. So melatonin, it's actually retracting the granules to allow more sunlight to get in during your nighttime functions. Now, it has right here reproductive functions. So in animals, during the wintertime, like deer to maybe hamsters to vertebrates that have to populate, and they populate a lot, the melatonin shuts down the reproductive system so they're not reproducing in the wintertime because those babies aren't going to last, not going to make it. So when the springtime comes, the melatonin now is lifted, not as much being emitted, therefore now it releases the reproductive system to allow the animals to be in heat estrus to now make babies. It doesn't work the same way in humans because we can make babies 24 hours, 365 days, so that's not the same thing with us. But the key is, if someone does have a tumor in the pineal gland, where there's now no melatonin being worked, not being there, those people can have precocious puberty, which means they now can have more elevation of like for a male, their penis may be bigger or grow too fast if there's a tumor in the pineal gland, because there's no melatonin shutting that down. So there's a lot going on with reproduction in animals we know about, but in humans, a little different story. So as I told you earlier, if you follow this, from the light, it hits your retina. The retina projects to the hypothalamus to a place called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is the place that they call the so-called circadian clock. Then you have some fibers, medial forebrain bundle, which are also associated with things pertaining to dopamine progression, enhancement of norepinephrine to help out with feeling good. So this is just a bundle of fibers in the forebrain that now go to your superior cervical ganglion. That's part of the top part of the spinal cord. Then it goes to the pineal gland. So this whole area right here is the pineal gland. Once it hits the pineal gland, norepinephrine helps to start a cascade of events. Norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter. It hits the adrenergic receptors, causes this adenylate cyclase to kick in cyclic AMP, because you now got to produce some chemicals, you got to produce some activity in that cell, and it then helps to make this transference of chemicals to make your neurotransmitters. What is a transference? Well, the amino acid that's important for starting this off is tryptophan. It's the amino acid that is converted to 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin. Serotonin, as you see right here, is then converted into N-acetylserotonin and then to melatonin. 5-hydroxytryptamine. 5-hydroxytryptamine, methoxytryptamine, 5-methoxytryptamine, tryptamine. We get into some chemicals that have influence on consciousness. So beyond, again, tryptophan, serotonin, melatonin, all coming from the pineal gland or being initiated by the pineal gland, they're going to go to target tissues, that is, to have an impact on how the body's going to respond. So melatonin helps out with jet lag, helps out with, they say, immunity, inflammatory compound. Again, we're talking about seasonal affective disorder, people who are getting depressed during the winter months, and maybe because that melatonin is not working properly. Serotonin itself, serotonin is a chemical associated with mood disorders. Low levels of serotonin cause depression. So the serotonin-melatonin link in the pineal gland, keep it healthy, your mind stays healthy, and you stay fit. So you can have natural highs from these chemicals. We just talked about serotonin if you don't have it working right. So melatonin's 5-methoxytryptamine, serotonin's 5-hydroxytryptamine, but this tryptamine becomes important because look at that other chemical down here, DMT, N-dimethyltryptamine. DMT is a molecule that gives people like spiritual, not trips, spiritual vibrations. So DMT is a molecule that we know does that, and guess what? It looks just like serotonin. 5-hydroxytryptamine, dimethyltryptamine. And then look at these other chemicals you heard of. Dopamine. You heard of dopamine because that's the so-called euphoric neurotransmitter. Makes you feel good. Also helps out with your movements. So dancing, movement, it all goes hand in hand. Why people feel good when they do that. Look at the other chemical called mescaline, a hallucinogenic substance that looks just like the molecule with a few kind of manipulations, like the hydrogen here, this hydroxyl groups are now, I think, the carboxyl groups up here on the end. Not just carboxyl, methane groups. Gotta know your chemistry. You know your chemistry, guess what? Now you can understand how this can be what? Made into that. Well, that can be flipped up and made into that. So the chemicals in our body are very important for how it is that the body functions on a natural level. So you can have natural highs by boosting these chemicals. Okay? So that DMT, how you biosynthesize DMT, which is a chemical that is associated with spirit. It says right here, tryptophan, we just talked about that, can be converted into 5-hydroxytryptophan, which leads to serotonin. We just talked about that. And then you have a certain enzyme called methyltransferase that can then make this methoxy N-dimethyltryptamine. We just talked about that. Here's one pathway. And then you have tryptophan can be converted to tryptamine, and this same enzyme, methyltransferase, can now make N,N-dimethyltryptamine. So in the brain, this can be done naturally. You meditate properly, stimulate the brain, open up this organ to be stimulated, it makes these chemicals. So there's a concept that people can have a calcified pineal gland. Calcification means that the organ may be, getting rigid. Well, there's different components of the pineal gland in the structure, because there's a place that the pineal gland like sits in fluid, it floats, but it's connected like a stalk to the brain. The habenula, posterior commissure, those two spots are connecting it, but that's where a lot of the calcium may develop, not just the organ itself that's floating in fluid. So the deposited calcium in the pineal is a byproduct of metabolic activity rather than a result of pineal degeneration. So something going on with metabolism of those chemicals, not so much just dying out and those cells dying. Those cells on the pineal gland look just like the cells on your eyeball in the retina. Not the eyeball, but the back of the retina, called where the photoreceptors are. Those similar photoreceptors are also in that pineal gland, so it is some connection to it being a third eye. The study that we looked at here is actually this is a study from 1983. It says the study indicated that pineal calcification was common among blacks. However, it's more so in white people. Only 30% showed no calcification from skull x-ray films, and then this was then post-mortem now. There are studies that are done that have been using neuroimaging, using MRI and CT scans that are looking at the white matter kind of hypersensitivities around the pineal gland. So you can do some scans, but we have to understand that the calcification occurred in the stalk. So anatomically, the pineal gland is a relatively free-moving body suspending in the subarachnoidal cerebrospinal fluid. So there's different types of like layers that keeps the fluid in the brain. You got the along the brain, the pia matter, the subarachnoid space, and the dura matter. Those are all layers. So that's where the fluid flows. If you have a problem with that fluid, it could create something like meningitis. But that fluid, the subarachnoid space, is where they're saying that you could have some, issues with the chemicals and not processing right. Therefore, it causes a problem with the pineal gland. So it says its delicate stalk attaches to the diencephalic roof of the third ventricle in the region of the, as I told you, the habenula in the front and the posterior commissure in the back that are connecting it to the brain. So this pineal gland, when you study it in the calcification and compare it to other organs, it can be pretty significant. So synopsis: the pineal gland attaches to the brain by those areas I just told you. Calcification is probably because of long-standing hypersecretory activity, meaning that calcium may be developing too much. Like you get calcium in your joints, causing bones to crack. Well, imagine a soft tissue like the brain. So calcification occurs in the stalk, habenula, and the posterior commissure. Just repeat. Over 70 years of skull x-ray films demonstrate that much higher incidence in European whites as compared to Asians and Africans. Also, studies have shown a higher incidence in American whites versus blacks. So all the studies are there. Got more studies to share with you about that. The morphological and functional characteristics of the pineal gland. People have done the research. I'm just sharing with you that we as African people need to understand this a little bit better. So, as we conclude, what I'm saying is I'm dedicating this to Brother Dr. Richard King. Again, if you ever find this, the Journal of Unconscious Life, Uraeus, excellent article he's written. Melanin, a Key to Freedom. It's like a bibliography and glossary of the topics and the terms, so it can be helpful. So let's respect him for creating that. And again, his magnus opus is African Origins of Biological Psychiatry, where he has a picture of what's coming from King Tut's tomb with the Eye of Heru and the diadem. He wears it on the chest right here, this image. But because of Dr. King, we know about how the science of the brain was studied way in the past. He brought this to life. So much power to him. He talked about the Benu bird, the Benu, about a stork. You know about the stork bringing a baby to life? So the Benu bird is also related to they're in Africa, and it relates to how the ventricles in the brain look like wings. So because of Dr. King, he was able to describe all that for us. And this past January, we had the falling of a giant, Dr. Charles Finch. Charles Finch passed away, and he was at the forefront of talking about African medicine, spirit of science out of the shadows. We still honor him as his soul is making its transition to the ancestral realm. Dr. Finch talked about Ebers papyrus, Edwin Smith papyrus. He went back 3,000 years to study that. We weren't waiting for white people to tell us about the brain. So when you see about Galen and Herophilus and Rene Descartes, he got that from somebody. So when you talk about what Dr. Finch has written, Africa and the birth of science and technology, a brief overview, Charles Finch. So he, along with Dr. King, magnificent doctors, medical doctors. He wrote The Star of Deep Beginnings, a genesis of ancient or African science and technology. It's a must read. He also wrote Echoes of an Old Dark Land, themes from the African Eden. So he's talking about the origins of man. And then one of his other books that he wrote prior to him passing was called Nile Valley Civilization, a 10,000-year history. Went deep in, again, if people built pyramids, how are they waiting around for white people to tell them things? Those were black African people in the hot sun, without clothes on, building, creating, developing. So we have the science. When you go back deeper in history, people studying the acorn, studying the seeds and what seeds can do to produce life. Seeds, I could take these seeds and go anywhere in the world and plant these seeds and now continue to exist. Swallow de Lubex, pick up his books. French scholar, Symbol and the Symbolic. Ancient Egypt, Science and the Evolution of Consciousness. These are not new terms that came about from the Africans. These are what they created. The Africans created this. Europeans got that from them. Swallow de Lubex also wrote The Temple in Man. Sacred Architecture and the Perfect Man. I've been there to Kemet. I've seen the buildings. How did they construct that on the science and the principles of how our bodies are constructed? Some of the temples have inner sanctuaries that relate to the brain. The deeper you go in is the more spiritual sites. And guess what? It pertains to the pineal gland, neuromelanin, and consciousness. So there's power, pigment power in the pineal gland. You might want to ask me now, okay, well, how do I make it bigger? How do I enhance it? How do I make it more powerful? Well, maybe that's the next video. Because all we want to do today is lay out the science to make you feel comfortable so that you would want to learn how to enhance your body, become stronger, and know yourself. So, until the next time, we will be back perhaps with part 2, because again, I did the other one in 1994. It's now 2026. So we're fast forwarding and bringing this to more contemporary times. So thanks for spending some time with me, and let's keep on learning, and we will be black.